This is part 2 of the hand stitches we need to know to learn bespoke tailoring. I am still using the 20 by 20 centimeter pieces of cloth to make these samples. This is a strong stitch used most commonly in the seat seam of trousers, shoulder seams of jackets, and setting sleeves in armholes. To practice this stitch, I'm placing two pieces of cloth on top of one another. What I'll be doing is putting ease into the top layer of cloth. We can mark a 1 centimeter seam allowance on one of the matching edges of our cloth. We can start a baste next to the chalk mark. We will put ease into the top layer of cloth now. We move the top layer of cloth slightly towards the stitch we made to create a bubble. We will continue the basting stitch to trap the ease in, then do the same again. Move more cloth towards the previous stitch, trapping it with the following stitch. Over 20 centimeters of cloth, I'm just going to ease in about 1 centimeter of the top cloth. You can see that the top cloth is around a centimeter shorter than the bottom cloth. We will usually do another line of basting on top of the basting we just did. We'll stagger this baste from the first though. This way it traps the ease better, holds it down, and distributes it better. We then use a steam iron, and we can use water as well to press in the ease, to shrink the extra cloth that we have trapped to make it easier to sew. It's easy to machine it at this point, but it's important to know the backstitch. If you try and ease in too much of your fabric, then it'll crease and create pleats when sewn. The Italians like that, I think, but for now let's try and make a clean finished article. Just take out the basting, press the fabric flat again, and try trapping less fabric between each stitch. For the backstitch, secure the thread and do a short stitch, literally 2 or 3 millimeters. Then go back through that same first hole, but come out another stitch length ahead of the first. Moving backwards again, go through the same hole as the previous stitch and come out another stitch length ahead again, and so on. You're moving backwards on the top side of the fabric and forwards on the underside of the fabric. The backstitch appears similar to a machine stitch on top, except it is used when the machine can't be used. Hence, the result is a tough stitch which, for example, can be used for shoulder seams. I'm also told that it's more flexible. First, to make a sample for the prick stitch, take a piece of cloth and fold it in half. Easy. Baste quite close to the fold and press the seam. Press it into a crease. For the prick stitch, on the right side you get a prick done right, and on the wrong side you have what looks like a machine stitch. Start with your usual fastening and start on the top of your seam. Go into the fabric as close as possible to where you started. Go through all of the layers of fabric, then 2 to 3 millimeters ahead of where you went in, send the needle back through all the layers of fabric to the top of the seam. Then repeat, just sending the needle back through the fabric almost exactly where you just came out. To finish this stitch, I suggest that we go to the underside of this stitch where the thread is much more visible anyway. We can tack the thread such that the tack isn't visible from the side with just the pricks. I start this one the same way with the same sample. Thread the needle onto the top of your seam again. Where you came out, you'll be making the first prick, though instead of going straight through to the other side of the fabric, send the needle in at an angle so that the needle comes out 3 to 5 millimeters ahead of where you've gone in. Pull the needle all the way through the bottom and pull the thread taut. And simply enough, send the needle back up vertically from where you just came out at the bottom. At that point now, do the same as the first prick. Send the needle through the fabric at an angle and come out 3 to 5 millimeters ahead underneath. And you're off creating your double prick stitches. I'll finish this one in the same way that I started it, tacking on one of the sides. This is objectively better than the regular prick stitch because there's less cloth that can get caught on things like Velcro, I guess. And it's also much more aesthetic when you might be seeing both sides of what you're stitching, such as on the front edge of a jacket, like on the lapel as well, and on flap pockets. The double prick stitch, however, is kind of arduous and time consuming. When we want the effect, though, but don't have the time, which we usually don't, we do a compromise of the single and double prick stitches. With the same sample again, we can start the stitch in the same way, coming up to the top of the seam. When we make the first stitch, we will once again send the needle into the cloth through just about where we came out. However, we will send the needle in at a very shallow angle. We will not stitch through the other side of the cloth yet. We will send the needle between the cloth to the desired length of the stitch. At that point, we will dig into the layer of cloth on the bottom and immediately send the needle back up through all layers to continue stitching along. This is faster than the double prick stitch and gives you a comparable result. This isn't actually its own stitch, it's still just the prick stitch, but since it's what I will often or usually do when prick stitching, I decided it needed its own name, but I will always just call it a prick stitch. Prick stitches are what we will often do when we set folded edges and seams so that they don't move one way or the other. We can finish this in the same way as we did the rest of the prick stitches. The ladder stitch is used, I think, exclusively along the gorge line to hold the lapel and collar together. You can practice this one by creating two parallel seams along a folded piece of fabric. Take a piece of cloth, fold opposing sides over by 1 centimeter, fold those edges inwards to sit next to each other, which is how it'll be when doing a gorge line. Begin this stitch in the ditch between the two folded edges, either knotting or tacking the thread. I'm starting with the left folded edge. I'm sending the needle into the cloth where it's folded, if a small amount underneath the fold, so that the thread doesn't become visible. The stitch will be 3 or 4 millimeters long before I come out of the cloth again on the fold, pulling the thread through. On the right hand edge, or just the opposing edge anyway, we will stick the needle into the fold in the same way. Again, we'll send the needle through the fold 3 or 4 millimeters before poking the needle back out of the seam. This time, we will poke the needle straight into the opposing folded edge. This is just faster to stitch the two together. Again, 3 or 4 mils before coming back out of the cloth and pulling the thread all the way through. We have made 2 steps of the ladder stitch. The next stitch, we then make another 2 steps of the ladder, and so on and so forth. As we sew the ladder stitch, it's important that we do stick the needle into the other fold exactly level with where it came out of the other side. This is so that as little thread as possible is exposed and the thread has the greatest amount of grip between the two seams, so that it can't be easily levered apart. This is easier on the gorge line because the seams are firmly basted onto 2 sets of canvas, therefore there is going to be more structure holding the seams down. But this is a trial by fire, I suppose, before you make your jacket. We can finish this stitch the same way we started it, however, we can also just tack across the two seams. On the jacket, one end of the gauge line is covered by lining. Therefore, the tack will be covered.